Earlier this month, I spoke to Andrew Eborn, who is a broadcaster, lawyer, and futurist. He's written a book about success, paradoxically called The Book of Failure. Let's find out more. Just before we get into the book, Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about your own background?
Yes, of course. Wonderful. Well, my background at the moment is the Tower of Babel. That's probably not what you meant, but my background, I grew up on the south coast of England in a glorious place called Bracklesham Bay. And I grew up in lots and lots of fields by the beaches as well. And my mother had some wonderful love of animals, and her real passion was to rescue animals. So we had 18 horses and about 100 cats and dogs and chickens and all sorts of things, and grew up really, really enjoying that sort of lifestyle. I was then sent away to boarding school, a great place called Lord Wandsworth College, where apart from being part of the debating team and also all sorts of things on that sort of basis, I played rugby, and I was in the same team as Johnny Wilkinson, the wonderful England legend that is. The only difference is a slightly different year, but the same playing fields, the same coach, and the same team. So had a great time there. And then I went off to university in Durham. I worked out that I wanted to either be a performer or to become a lawyer, and realized that they're probably one and the same thing. So I thought, if I'm going to spend my life as a lawyer, I'll probably spend most of my time down south. So I go as far north as possible, and worked out that three universities which were sort of on my hit list were Cambridge, Oxford, and Durham were the top three in that stage. And Durham was number two, I think, just behind Cambridge. So I thought I'd pop up there, and had a brilliant time up there. And whilst up there, I managed to combine my passion with law together with performing. So I perform and present, work at a lot of the northern clubs and so on and so forth, before coming back down to London, where I qualified as a barrister. And I was very lucky because I managed to get a scholarship to the bar. And what that meant is that I got a free flat for a year in the Temple. And as a kid, you never appreciate these things until you have to start paying your own way a little bit later. But I got a free flat in the Temple, and the Temple is this wonderful place, hundreds of years old, and it's like being in a time warp. And the great thing about it is, apart from the glorious architecture and everything else, it was walking distance for what then was London weekend television. So I work in the courts, and I would work as a barrister, but also at night time, I could go over and then perform for LWT and various other broadcasters, both on and off screen. And the sort of way that it progressed is clients got me more and more involved in their business side as well as their legal side. And it occurred to me that a lot of things in history, there is a pattern. And people always say that history repeats itself. And the reason history repeats itself is because people never learn the lessons from history. So I would work with some major corporations effectively as their strategic advisor. We'd predict what's going to happen in terms of technology, what consumers are going to be looking at from that point of view. And lots of political parties, the inevitability of when an election comes up. You start talking about sleaze. Well, what a surprise. If you look at the patterns of history, that's exactly what will dominate the headlines. And so what more and more clients were doing is turning to me and saying, okay, we want to manage the brand. We want to look at how we can maximize the rights that we own, but also to make sure that we can work together to brand build and also damage limitation in certain circumstances. And that's what gave rise effectively to where I started putting it all in writing, in addition to the years of learning. And a lot of people would say, look, how did you predict so many of these major events when pollsters, for example, were getting it all wrong? And I pointed out that what happens is there is this pattern. If you understand human behavior, you understand how the media will report these things, then you've got a blueprint, if you like, for how to win an election. And so I put that out there before the days of Trump, before Theresa May, before Brexit, and explained what was going to happen and who was going to win and why they were going to win, and managed to succeed. When the pollsters all floundered and got it all wrong, I predicted it accurately simply on that sort of basis. And I think if you look at what's happening now, it's following the same pattern. We talk about cash for curtains, or you talk about, is it curtains for Boris? All these wonderful things. But the reality is, this is a glorious misdirection. And if you look at the principles, and the Conservatives are up in the polls, they're right at 11% ahead of Labour, people are now aware that it's spin. And I think if you get rid of the issues and you start looking at the question everything, that would be the ultimate way to ensure success.
Are you basically a consultant?
Well, I'm a number of things. So I am qualified as a lawyer, both as a barrister and also as a solicitor. And I've worked with some major brands around the world. For example, I helped Pioneer bring laser karaoke over here. We did the very first computer games for major sports like Formula One. I helped TDK with a transition from blank tape and so on and so forth. Fujifilm, some great, great clients. And it works by understanding the client's business, but also helping them to mold their future. So yes, absolutely, lots of companies use me as a consultant to talk about the way that they can predict. They call it a futurist now. I love it in this business, so they come around with different labels for everybody. But a futurist basically will work out what is likely to happen based on certain understandings. And with my background as a lawyer, what I've been doing for the last several months is approaching various business people and major celebrities who will come on to chat shows. I run the Andrew Eborn show, rather imaginatively, and we've had all sorts of great guests from around the world talking about their lives and their experiences. But what we've done, rather than a normal journalist, we approach this in as a lawyer, if you like. So you've got the forensic discussion, but in a fun and chatty way, but to make sure that you can get to the bottom of real issues. So it's using that knowledge as a lawyer, it's using that experience, the business experience, to get to what I call the truth of a matter. And all of those secrets are now sort of revealed, what used to be called the dark secrets of the spin doctors, phrases people never heard beforehand, the new vocabulary. People are starting to understand that there are ways of controlling the message, predicting the future, and making sure that people are safe as a result of it.
Right, let's talk about the book.
So yes, no, the book. So the Andrew Eborn Book of Failure, which is available in all good bookshops and a few dodgy ones as well. What this is the ultimate revelation of the secrets behind success. And what I pointed out, and we've documented lots of examples throughout history where you can see the lessons. And my basic principle is this, is that people always celebrate success, but they rarely talk about the failures that made that success. So I always say that if necessity is the mother of invention, then failure is the father of success. So we look at examples in history, we look at why the pollsters, I gave examples, why they got it so wrong in different elections. And I tell you what's going to happen in the future. Because basically, if you can do that, then you can unlock those secrets yourself. And it's also an inspirational book. A lot of people have said, look, we've taken these stories, who are people who are brave enough to talk about their failures. What you can then do is learn your lessons from those failures to make your own aspirations successful.
Are you ready for my cheeky question?
Go. Oh, I love it. Was that it?
No, you're ready. It's coming now.
Go on then.
My cheeky question is, wouldn't the ultimate accolade for a book on failure be if nobody bought it?
Oh, isn't that be great? It'd be wonderful. Well, I know what I've done. I would rather everybody had it for free, because the lessons in there. Because what's happened, I'll tell you what's happened in society, David, is this, is that we get our news from too limited number of sources. Most people, this is why there is so much prejudice in the world and so many extreme views, is that what I tell people to do, rather than just getting your news from one source, just reading one newspaper, just listening to one radio show, unless it's the David's show, you work on that basis, what you have to do is get your news from different sources. People say that if you don't read the newspapers, you're uninformed, but if you do read them, you're misinformed. And the reason for that is that you have to work out that prejudices and a certain stance are coming from wherever you get your news. So what I encourage people to do is to flick through the channels, get your news from the BBC, then look at ITV, look at RT, look at all these different news organizations around the world and see how they report particular stories. Because you know yourself, so many things get misrepresented or misconstrued or twisted, depending on what angle you want to go to.
Tell us a little bit about your philosophy of life. What do you believe? What do you feel about life?
Well, there are a number of basic tenets. I believe everything is possible, that the key is to have a passion to make it want to happen. If you've got clarity, if you do, they always say that if you do something that you love, that you'll never work a day in your life, because effectively it feels as though you're going in, you're doing something with passion and making it happen. What I would really want to do is to make people question everything. Because what happens is if you realize, first of all, that we've all been victims of spin, and what people tend to do is they get positions where they confirm their prejudices. So you might just read one newspaper which confirms your views. You'll have a circle of friends who have the same views as you. So all of a sudden it becomes a spiral. You listen to radio reports and so on and so forth. Now we're swimming in a sea of misinformation. And as a result of that, we can find any information, any evidence to back up any view, however extreme. What I would urge people to do is to question everything. And that's what I try to do. Going throughout history, you have a look at why certain things happen. And one of the key elements is that a lot of history is written by the winners. So often you read certain history books in one country which may not have won a war, and it's a very different version of events to that which did.
Now, you're a futurist, so what do you see for yourself in the next 10 years?
Oh, very good. Well, because I do, and it's what I encourage everybody to do, is to follow what you want to happen. I remember when growing up as a child, people would always say, oh, I wish I did that, or wish I knew that when I was your age. And I always thought, well, why on earth didn't you? Why have a life full of regrets, wishing that you've done something? I would rather try absolutely everything than turn around and say, well, at least I tried it. Maybe it didn't work out. It doesn't matter. So I, at the moment, am doing absolutely everything that I want to do. I will try new ventures. I will meet new people. I will look at new opportunities, but take the lessons that you learn along the way to make that happen. So the short answer is I'll be doing more of the same, but hopefully spreading two key messages. And those messages are this, is that firstly, question everything. I do want people to understand that the world is not just about sound bites, but also to deal with that sort of side. And I'll give you a few examples on that. We have elections looming, as you know, around here in the UK, for the mayor and the councils and so on and so forth. As I predicted in the book, what's going to happen, it follows the same pattern every time there's an election. The way that you have this master, the sultans of spin, as I call them, will start with distractions. You'll start hurling names and digging up sleaze and wonderful little sound bites that basically try and rubbish the people. But the public are now becoming more aware of this. So what they do, they're starting to say, look, hang about, this is just a distraction. What are the key issues? And what happens is that we've got a number of examples. We live in a world which is really quite divided, and we've been divided in the past about Brexit, for example. And the thing about social media is that everybody but everybody becomes a social expert. And as soon as those were experts on Brexit and all of that sort of stuff, the Constitution, they also then turn around and become experts on virology as soon as we've got this pandemic which we're having to deal with. And somebody knows somebody who needs that and everything else. We are swimming in misinformation. And it's a question of turning around and saying, what I really hope people will do is question things. The other thing that we suffer from, David, as well, is generalizations. And so often it's so easy for people to sling mud without going into specifics. We've had a couple of examples of that very recently. One was very famously the Oprah interview with Harry and Meghan, where all sorts of allegations, horrendous allegations, were put out there. What I would have hoped, however, is a bit more forensic. When you're saying something is racist, for example, or mental health, really key issues in the world at the moment, it's important to say, look, absolutely, we abhor both of those things and we must deal with it appropriately. What happens, though, is if there are allegations, you should look at those, drill down who, what, why, when, in a journalistic sort of way, so you can question everything. Because so often people sling mud, and if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. All of a sudden, sling enough mud and some of it will stick. So what I would hope my mission will be is to make sure people do question everything. The other big passion that I have is indeed, we mentioned mental health on that sort of side, is indeed mental health. Because we used to have a real stigma attached to mental health. And I formed what's called canned laughter. It's okay not to be okay. Somebody called me the Joe Wicks of the mind, which I love as an accolade. But the basic sort of principle is this, is that if you break a leg, what happens is people sign the cast and they make a joke about it and so on and so forth, and you've got no shame. What's happened with mental health for many years, there's been a massive stigma. And what I've been trying to do on my show and also encourage those in the public eye is to talk about their own issues. If you prick me, do I not bleed? If you tickle me, do I not laugh? And the reality is this, we're all the same. When you peel away the layers of the onion beneath us, we are all the same. We have our same trials and tribulations. And the more we can encourage people to talk about their own demons, the more it can help other people who are suffering in this time. So that's what I would say as a two ambitions: question everything, make sure we have people who are more analytical about the stuff which is regurgitated out there, and also to make sure that we focus on key issues such as mental health, so that we can be the generation that talks about mental health, so that the next generation doesn't suffer the stigma.